So this is the Poco X3 GT. It's the newest gaming smartphone from Poco, and based on the way they market this phone, they claim that it has flagship grade specs that won't break the bank. If that sounded awfully familiar, that's because Poco also did the same for the Poco F3 and the Poco X3 Pro. I have tons of coverage about the two devices, so go check out our channel to know more about the other two phones. But for now, we are going to talk about the X3 GT and my honest thoughts about it. To all the subscribers, welcome back, and thanks for stopping by once again. And if you're new here, I create tech videos, so feel free to drop a sub to get notified of new content. The X3 GT starts at 15,990 pesos for the 128GB version and 17,990 for the 256GB. Both are paired with 8GB RAM. If you can grab it on sale, the price of the base model drops to 14,990 and the top model to 15,990. Judging from the prices alone, the X3 GT is already the awkward middle child between the already affordable gaming phone X3 Pro and the flagship killer like F3. But unlike those two, the X3 GT separates itself by using MediaTek's chipset. Now, I know you have your own reservations, but for now, let's talk about the design. The X3 GT feels almost like the X3 Pro with its hefty build and thick design. However, it's lighter, thinner, and narrower, so it's a bit more comfortable to use with one hand. But unlike the F3, the back is using a plastic material. So instead of having better scratch resistance, you now have a semi-gloss finish along with these ridges that you can actually feel immediately as you pick up the device. I thought the back was using a matte finish, but it doesn't really look like matte, at least not to my eyes. It still shines when hit by light, but I think the ridges make the fingerprint smudges less noticeable more than the matte-like finish. Poco calls this specific model wave blue, but in person it's more like teal in most conditions. I said most because sometimes it looks like green indoors. I'm not really a fan of the look, to be honest with you. I think the cloud white looks better, as well as the Stargaze black that has a glossy finish. One thing worth noting though is that there's no headphone jack here, which is unfortunate since I've seen MediaTek powered devices with audio jack. So instead you have the stereo speakers on the top and bottom, the IR blaster, and the USB-C port. Quick side note, the speakers are tuned by JBL, and based on my initial use, I can easily tell that the speakers on this one really focus on the low end. I think it's already one of the best speakers at this price range, but we'll see more once I put it through its paces. There's no micro SD slot here, but you have two 5G SIM card slots, which is another decision Poco had to make. That's about it for the design. Now let's see what's on the front of the X3 GT. It's a 6.6 inches IPS LCD with 120Hz refresh and HDR10 support, and is protected by Gorilla Glass Victus. In exchange for a slightly less premium build, Poco decided to install the toughest mobile display glass to date, which is only available on the most high-end phones like the ROG Phone 5 and the outer screen of the recently announced Galaxy Z Fold 3. I think it's a nice addition, but I also think most shoppers of Poco phones will probably install a screen protector just for safety. And lastly, the entire phone is IP53 rated, meaning it can survive water splashes and has decent protection against dust. Enough about the display, what about what's under the hood? Like I've mentioned earlier, the Poco X3 GT is using MediaTek's Dimensity 1100 5G chipset. It's a chip based on a 6nm process, which is slightly smaller than the 7nm of the X3 Pro's Snapdragon 860. According to benchmarks online, the Dimensity 1100 is a tier higher than the 860, but a tier below the Snapdragon 870. Again, it's that awkward middle child situation. But in other words, the X3 GT is still fast. It has UFS 3.1 storage, albeit non-expandable, and MIUI 12.5 out of the box feels good already. In fact, I think the MIUI version on this phone is the most stable I've tested since Poco M3 Pro 5G. I barely see frame drops, and I have yet to install a third-party launcher, and that's already saying a lot. Since this phone is geared towards gamers, the X3 GT is packing a 5000 mAh battery along with a powerful 67-watt charger in the box. According to claim, it should get the phone to 100% in as short as 42 minutes. Lest we forget, the X3 GT also has decent cameras, at least on paper, So the back cameras sport a 64 megapixel sensor, an 8 megapixel ultra-wide and a 2 megapixel macro. The front camera on the other end is using a 16 megapixel sensor. If you put those specs together with a Snapdragon chip, you're almost guaranteed good camera performance. However, we're looking at a MediaTek chip right now. I've tested several Dimensity phones in the past, and I can confidently say that they are not the same chipsets. They are fast, they are less likely to overheat and throttle, and they usually perform better than what benchmarks portray. The only thing I'm concerned about the Dimensity lineup is their ISPs. There's no doubt that the performance is already getting there with the competition, but I think MediaTek still has some work to do in the camera department, at least based on the previous phones I've tested. Again, this is not a full review. The full review will come out soon, so feel free to comment your questions about this phone below and we'll try to answer them in the next one. Before I end this video, I have some thoughts about the X3 GT, particularly its situation in the market. Right off the bat, I don't think this phone is a bad value phone. Despite being sandwiched by its own siblings, I think the X3 GT is still a good phone when you compare it with other phones outside Poco. Its existence might not be because Poco wants you to steer towards its other devices. I think it's because MediaTek is finally competitive enough to be a decent alternative to Snapdragon devices. This year has been the most diverse lineup of smartphones wherein most devices on the market are targeted towards specific types of users. You basically don't have to spend more for a phone with a feature that you don't really need. In the end, more options are always better for consumers. As always, drop a sub or like if you feel supporting the channel, and until the next one, stay safe.